They mocked the cowboy the moment he walked in. The sun was low, turning the dirt road into gold dust, and the sound of laughter echoed through the street. He was new in town, quiet, the kind of man who didn't talk unless there was a reason. That silence made them curious and cruel. One of the men leaned against a post, grinning, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Go on, cowboy, pick any girl you want." The others laughed, waiting for the joke to land. The girls standing nearby giggled too, pretending not to care. Some of them loved the attention, flipping their hair, glancing his way, hoping he'd notice. But there was one girl who didn't move. She stood a little apart, looking down, hands folded in front of her. The crowd never missed a chance to point her out. "Not her," someone shouted. "She's too big." And the laughter grew louder. The cowboy didn't laugh, he just watched them. His eyes moved slowly from face to face, like he was trying to understand what was so funny. The teasing didn't reach him. He didn't play along. The air around him felt heavier, quieter, as if the world had stopped waiting for his next move. Everyone expected him to do what most men would do, to pick the girl everyone already approved of. The prettiest one, the safe one, the one who wouldn't make the crowd raise an eyebrow. But there was something different in his stillness, something that made even the loudest laugh start to fade. He looked once more toward the group of girls, then toward the one they mocked. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. Her eyes met his for half a second, uncertain, almost afraid, before she looked away again. Maybe she thought he'd laugh too. Maybe she'd already accepted it. The crowd leaned in, waiting. The man who started the joke said again, louder, "Well, cowboy, what's the holdup? Pick one." The air buzzed with impatience. The cowboy took one step forward. His boots hit the ground slow and steady. His hand lifted. He pointed straight ahead and said, clear enough for everyone to hear, "Her, the one you call too big." The street went silent. The silence that followed his words was thick enough to taste. No one moved, no one even breathed. The cowboy's voice still hung in the air, calm and unshaken, as if he hadn't just broken the unspoken rule of that town. Every pair of eyes turned toward the girl he had pointed at. She stood there frozen, her mouth slightly open, unsure if she'd heard him right. The wind tugged at her hair, lifting a few strands across her face, but she didn't dare move them aside. A few people chuckled nervously at first, trying to turn the moment back into a joke. "He's got a strange taste," one man said, elbowing his friend. Another added, "Must be blind under that hat." Laughter tried to rise again, but it didn't sound as confident now. Something about the cowboy's stillness made it hard to laugh too loud. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't playing their game. The girl, her name was Clara, though few people ever used it kindly, looked around, expecting to see smirks and whispers. She saw them, of course, but this time something felt different. Their laughter didn't sting in the same way. It was fading, losing its power, slipping into confusion. Her heart beat fast, the sound of it louder than the murmurs around her. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the ground, but something in the cowboy's steady eyes held her there. He began to walk toward her. Each step was slow, deliberate, boots kicking up little puffs of dust. The sound of leather creaked softly with every move. No one dared to stop him. He passed by the men who had mocked him, passed by the girls who suddenly didn't know where to look. One of them tried to laugh again, high-pitched and shaky, but it died halfway out of her throat. Clara felt her breath catch as he came closer. Her cheeks burned. She had dreamed of being noticed before, but never like this. Never under a spotlight of mockery and disbelief. The last thing she expected was for someone, anyone, to pick her when everyone else had already decided she wasn't worth picking. The cowboy stopped in front of her. The space between them felt heavy with every unsaid thing. He tipped his hat slightly, not in mockery but in respect. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice calm, low, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to be heard. For a second she couldn't answer. Words tangled up in her chest. No one had called her ma'am before, not like that, not with that kind of sincerity. Around them the crowd shuffled, unsure what to do. The joke had slipped out of their hands, turned into something else, something that didn't belong to them anymore. Her. One of the men blurted again, trying to drag the laughter back. "You serious, Cowboy?" The cowboy turned his head slightly toward him. His eyes were calm, almost bored, but there was a weight in them that made the man stop talking right away. "I don't joke about people," he said simply, then turned back to Clara. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides. She wanted to look away, to hide from the eyes watching her, but for the first time she didn't. There was something grounding about his gaze, something that said, "You don't have to shrink anymore." No one knew what to do with that moment. The crowd started to thin, people drifting away, pretending they had better things to do. Some shook their heads. Others whispered to each other, wondering if this was some strange bet or act of pity. But the cowboy didn't move until most of them had left. When the noise had faded into the wind, he finally spoke again. "They don't know what they're talking about," he said quietly. "Don't let them make you small." Clara blinked, not sure what to say. No one had ever told her that before. People had told her to lose weight, to talk less, to take up less space, but never to asterisk not be small. The words didn't quite fit in her mind yet. He started to walk away, as if the moment were over, as if he hadn't just turned her world upside down. She watched him, trying to understand what had just happened. Why her? Why say that in front of everyone? Why mean it? Her feet moved before her thoughts caught up. "Wait," she said, her voice almost a whisper, but he heard it. He stopped and looked back. "Why did you do that?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He studied her for a long moment before answering. "Because you deserve to be chosen without being laughed at," he said, "and someone needed to show them that." The simplicity of it broke her, not in a painful way, but in a freeing one. Tears welled up, and she quickly wiped them before they could fall. She didn't want him to see her cry, not now, not when she finally felt seen for something other than what people called her. He nodded once, like that was all there was to say, and turned to leave again. The sound of his boots faded down the street, steady and sure. Clara stood there long after he was gone, her mind replaying his words over and over. The air felt different now. The whispers around town would come, she knew that. They'd talk, they'd twist the story, they'd call her names again, but it wouldn't sound the same anymore. Because someone had looked at her and seen something they couldn't. That night, as the sun sank behind the hills and the town lights flickered on one by one, Clara caught her reflection in a dusty window. For the first time, she didn't look away. She didn't pick apart what she saw. The woman in the glass was the same as she'd always been, but now, somehow, she looked stronger. And far away in the quiet of his small rented room, the cowboy sat by the window, watching the stars. He wasn't thinking about what the others had said or how they'd laughed. He was thinking about the look in her eyes when she finally believed, even for a second, that she was worth being chosen. Morning light spilled over the rooftops of the small western town, painting everything in shades of gold and dust. Life went on as if nothing had happened the day before. But people were talking. Oh, they were talking. Every shop, every porch, every corner had whispers of the same story. The cowboy, the big girl, the moment he chose her. Some told it with laughter, others with disbelief, and a few with something close to admiration, though none would admit it out loud. Clara heard the whispers before she even stepped outside. She always did. But this time they sounded different. They weren't sharp daggers meant to cut. They were curious, softer, mixed with confusion. "You think he really meant it?" one woman said near the bakery. "Maybe he was just being nice." Another answered, "No man would risk being mocked like that for pity. Maybe he saw something we didn't." Clara didn't stop to listen, though her heart tightened with every word. She kept walking, holding her head just a little higher than usual, even if it trembled from the effort. When she passed the saloon, she could feel the stares through the swinging doors. Men leaned over their tables, lowering their voices when she walked by. A few smiled nervously, unsure if they should joke or stay quiet. One man called out something under his breath, but his friend quickly elbowed him and shook his head. The memory of the cowboy's stare still lingered in their minds, the way he had silenced them without even raising his voice. For Clara, that silence had been the loudest thing she'd ever heard. It echoed inside her now, pushing her to keep walking, to not shrink the way she always did. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something inside her had. She didn't know what to do with it yet. It felt heavy and strange, like wearing a new dress that didn't quite fit but made you feel beautiful anyway. At the general store, old Mrs. Keller looked up from behind the counter. "Morning, Clara," she said softly, her eyes kind. She didn't say anything else, but the warmth in her tone was new. Clara managed a small smile and nodded. Even small kindness felt enormous when you'd spent years being invisible. She picked up some flour, sugar, and a tin of coffee, her hands still trembling just a little. As she turned to leave, a little boy ran in, nearly bumping into her. His mother rushed after him, scolding, "Watch where you're going." Then she looked at Clara, hesitated, and added quickly, "Sorry, ma'am." The same word the cowboy had used. Clara almost stopped walking. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had called her that without sarcasm. It wasn't just a word, it was respect. And somehow that small, simple thing made her eyes sting. Outside, she took a deep breath. The sun was high now, hot on her face. She squinted down the street, and that's when she saw him again. The cowboy, sitting by the well, his hat tilted low, a piece of straw between his fingers. He wasn't watching anyone, just sitting there like he had all the time in the world. Her heart raced. Part of her wanted to turn and walk the other way, pretend she hadn't seen him. But another part, the new part that had woken up inside her yesterday, wanted to walk over. So she did. Each step felt like a test, her pulse thudding in her ears. He looked up when she got close, and the faintest smile touched his lips. "Morning, Clara," he said, already knowing her name somehow. She blinked, caught off guard. "You know my name?" she asked. He nodded. "Small town, people talk, I just listen." There was a quiet between them, not awkward, just still. The kind of quiet that felt like a space waiting to be filled with something real. Clara shifted the bag of flour in her hands. "They're talking again," she said softly, "about yesterday." He nodded, still calm. "Let them," he said. "They'll talk till something else comes along." She hesitated, watching him. "You don't care what they say?" He shook his head. "No reason to. Words don't change who I am, or who you are." The words hit her harder than she expected. For years, she'd lived as if the whispers around her were truth, as if every cruel comment defined her. And now this stranger sat there, unbothered, as if their opinions were just dust in the wind. "I don't understand you," she admitted. Why did you do it? You could have picked anyone." He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because everyone deserves to be seen," he said simply. "And they all pretend they don't see you, that's their loss." Her throat tightened. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to," he said. "I know enough. I saw how you stood when they laughed. You didn't run. You didn't fight back either. You just stood. That takes more strength than any of them know." Clara couldn't look at him anymore. The ground felt safer. She blinked fast, trying to push the tears back. But one slipped down anyway, tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. He didn't say anything about it. He just took off his hat, placed it over his knee, and said, "People think strength looks loud. They think it means fighting or shouting. But real strength, it's quiet. It's in the way you keep showing up." The words sank deep into her chest, slow and heavy. She had spent so long thinking she was weak, believing every name they'd thrown at her. Now, for the first time, she wondered if maybe they'd all been wrong. A horse neighed from down the road, and a group of riders passed by, dust swirling around them. They barely noticed the two figures by the well, the man and the woman standing still, a strange peace between them. After a moment, Clara said softly, "You talk like you've seen a lot." He gave a small laugh. "Maybe. Enough to know a person's worth doesn't depend on what others see." She looked at him, really looked, and saw that his eyes carried stories he wasn't telling yet. Maybe that was what drew her in, his calm, his certainty. It felt like something she'd been missing all her life. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of the saloon piano. She smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth trembling. "You know," she said, "they'll keep talking about us now." He shrugged lightly. "Then let them talk about something true for once." For the first time in as long as she could remember, Clara laughed, not to hide, not to please, but because the sound just came out. It was small, shaky, but it was hers. The cowboy smiled at the sound, tipping his hat slightly again. The moment passed quietly, like a secret the town didn't deserve to know. And as the wind carried the dust between them, both of them knew something had begun, something that didn't need the world's permission to exist. The following morning came slow and quiet, the kind of morning where even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Clara woke early, the sunlight spilling through her thin curtains, painting soft lines across the room. She lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that yesterday really happened, that someone had stood up for her, not out of pity, not as a joke, but because they meant it. The sound of boots outside pulled her back. She got up, peeked through the small window, and saw him again. The cowboy, sitting by the fence this time, working on a piece of rope, calm as ever. It almost looked like he'd been waiting for her, though he didn't glance her way. He just sat, humming something low under his breath, as if the world wasn't still whispering about the two of them. Clara hesitated. Part of her wanted to open the door, to thank him properly, to say something more than what she'd managed yesterday. But another part of her, old habits, old fears, held her back. What would people think if they saw her talking to him again? The gossip had already stretched across town like wildfire. Maybe it was better to stay quiet, stay safe. But then she thought about what he'd said, about strength being quiet, about showing up. Her hand tightened around the door handle. The wood creaked as she opened it, and before she could change her mind, she stepped outside. The morning air was cool and sharp. The cowboy looked up when he heard her footsteps. That same small smile touched his lips, the kind that said he'd been expecting her. "Morning, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Morning," she answered softly, trying not to sound nervous. He patted the spot next to him on the fence rail. "Sun's better from this side," he said. She hesitated only a moment before walking over and sitting down beside him. The wood was warm from the sun, and for a moment they just watched the town wake up. Children ran down the street, chasing a hoop. The blacksmith was already at work, the steady clang of metal echoing through the air. Everything looked so ordinary, and yet Clara knew nothing about this morning was ordinary for her. "Seems like you've stirred the whole town," he said after a while, his tone light, almost teasing. She let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. "So I've heard," she said. "Everywhere I go, someone's whispering about us." "About you asterisk," he corrected gently. "They don't care much about me. I'll be gone soon enough." Her heart skipped. "Gone?" he nodded. "Got work up north, just passing through here. Didn't plan to stay long." The words hit harder than she expected. She didn't even know why. He was a stranger, a man she'd known for 2 days. But in those 2 days, he'd done something no one else had managed in years. He made her feel seen. She didn't want that feeling to disappear as quickly as it came. "You don't seem like a man who leaves things unfinished," she said quietly. He glanced at her, a hint of a smile in his eyes. "Who says I'm leaving it unfinished?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at her hands, the calluses from years of work, the small scars that told stories no one cared to hear. He noticed the way she looked at them and said softly, "You've worked hard your whole life, haven't you?" She nodded. "Since I could walk. My pa was a farmer. When he passed, there wasn't anyone else, so I stayed." He listened, really listened. Not the kind of listening that waits for its turn to talk, but the kind that lets silence fill the space comfortably. After a while, she said, "People think they know me. They see me and think that's all there is. They don't ask what I want, what I dream of. They just see this." She motioned to herself, her voice breaking slightly at the end. He didn't rush to comfort her or interrupt. He just nodded slowly. "That's their mistake, not yours." His words were steady, simple, but they carried weight. She turned to him, studying his face. There were lines near his eyes, sunburn across his neck, a calm that seemed carved from years on the road. He wasn't the kind of man who said more than he needed to. Every word meant something. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked finally. "You don't know me. You could have ignored them. You could have laughed along." He looked out toward the horizon, his eyes narrowing slightly against the light. "I've seen too many people get laughed out of who they are," he said. "Watch good folks shrink because of bad words. Sometimes all it takes is one person to show them they don't have to." The way he said it made her chest tighten. There was pain in his tone, something from his past he didn't talk about. She didn't press him, though. Some things didn't need to be explained to be understood. They sat in silence again, listening to the hum of the town. Clara felt something strange building inside her, something that wasn't quite hope, but close. She wasn't sure if she was brave enough to hold on to it. After a while, the cowboy stood and stretched. "I should get going," he said. "Got miles to cover before the sun sets." Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something, to ask him to stay, but the words wouldn't come. All she managed was, "Will you come back?" He paused, one hand resting on the fence post. "If I've got reason to," he said. "You give me one, I might." Her heart pounded in her chest. "And what would that reason be?" she asked. He smiled just a little. "Maybe seeing you stop listening to their voices. Maybe watching you stand a little taller." She couldn't help but smile back. "That's not much to promise." "It's enough," he said. And with that he tipped his hat again, turned toward his horse, and started down the dusty road. She watched him go until the horizon swallowed him up. When the dust finally settled, Clara looked around. The same people who had mocked her the day before were watching from doorways and windows, curious, confused. She didn't shrink this time. She didn't look away. She just stood there, the morning sun on her face, her chin lifted, her shoulders back. For the first time, she felt the world shift slightly beneath her feet, not because someone chose her, but because she finally understood she had been worth choosing all along. The days rolled by slower after he left. The town went back to its routine, the sound of hammers from the blacksmith's shop, the gossip floating from the bakery, the laughter from the saloon. But Clara felt everything differently now. Every morning she still heard people whisper when she passed, but their words didn't dig as deep anymore. They didn't know it, but that one moment, the cowboy's choice, had built something inside her that couldn't be undone. She worked the same job she always had, sweeping the porch at the general store, helping customers, hauling sacks of flour twice her size. The same people walked past her, the same faces that once turned away, but now they looked at her a little longer. Some looked curious, some even smiled awkwardly, unsure how to act. She could feel them trying to understand what he saw in her. It was as if his decision had made them question something in themselves, and that unsettled them. One afternoon, as the sun burned red over the rooftops, a group of young women stood by the water pump, whispering and stealing glances at her. They had been among those who laughed the loudest that day. Clara tried to ignore them, but then she heard one of them say, maybe he just felt sorry for her. The others laughed softly, but it didn't sting the same. She straightened up, turned, and met their eyes. Or maybe, she said evenly, he just saw something you didn't. The words surprised even her. The girls blinked, unsure how to respond. For the first time, Clara didn't walk away first. She turned back to her work, calm and steady, the sound of her broom brushing against the wood as if nothing had happened. The silence behind her was a victory she didn't expect, quiet but powerful. At night, when the town finally rested, she would sit by her window and look at the stars. Sometimes she wondered where he was, if he ever thought of her, if he meant what he said about coming back. But even when the loneliness crept in, it wasn't the same as before. It didn't feel like emptiness anymore. It felt like waiting for something she knew she was ready for, even if it never came. Weeks turned into months, and with every passing day, Clara noticed how her world was changing. People started treating her differently, not because of pity, but because she carried herself differently. Confidence had a quiet way of demanding respect. When she walked through town now, people greeted her first. Even the ones who used to look through her now nodded politely. One day, old Mrs. Keller from the store took her aside and said, "You've been glowing lately, dear. Something's different about you." Clara smiled faintly and replied, "Maybe I finally started seeing myself the way someone else did." The old woman nodded, not asking more, but her eyes were kind and full of understanding. Not everyone was happy about it, though. Some couldn't stand to see her change. They whispered more fiercely now, desperate to pull her back into the shadows she'd escaped. But Clara didn't hide anymore. Their words were like wind, loud, fleeting, and powerless. One evening, near closing time, a man from out of town came in asking for supplies. He was tall, with a rough beard and a stranger's hat. When he caught sight of Clara behind the counter, he smiled and said, "You're the girl that Cowboy talked about." She froze for a second. "What did he say?" she asked. The man chuckled softly. Said he met a woman who reminded him what real strength looks like. Said she stood taller than anyone he'd met, even when the world tried to break her. Her breath caught in her chest. The cowboy had spoken about her. Remembered her, she didn't know whether to smile or cry. "Where is he now?" she asked, voice trembling. "Headed north, last I heard. Said he'd come back someday." She nodded, trying to hide the emotion pressing behind her eyes. The man tipped his hat politely and left, leaving her standing there with her heart beating fast and her hands gripping the counter. That night, she stepped outside and looked at the open road stretching beyond the town. The same road he had taken when he left. The stars were bright, scattered across the sky like silver dust. She remembered his voice, steady and sure. "You give me a reason, I might come back." She whispered to the night, "I'm giving you one." From that day on, Clara carried herself like a woman who knew she was more than what they said. She spoke up when someone was mistreated. She helped others the way he had helped her, quietly, without making a scene, just by being kind in places where kindness was rare. And little by little, the town began to shift. People noticed how she never raised her voice, yet somehow people listened. They started coming to her for advice, for help, for comfort. One afternoon, a young girl came into the store crying. The townsfolk had teased her for being too tall, too different. Clara knelt beside her, brushed the tears from her cheeks and said softly, "They don't get to decide your worth. You do." The girl sniffled, looking up at her with wide eyes, and Clara realized that the same words once saved her too. That night, when she walked home under the dim street lamps, she felt the wind shift. There was something in the air, a stillness that felt familiar. She turned the corner and her heart nearly stopped. A lone horse stood by the fence, dust on its hooves, reins hanging loose. Beside it, leaning against the post, was the cowboy. He looked older, maybe a little more tired, but his eyes were the same. Calm, steady, full of quiet knowing. He smiled when he saw her. "Told you I might come back if you gave me a reason," he said. Clara stood there, frozen between disbelief and joy. She wanted to say 100 things, but none came out. She just walked toward him, her steps slow but certain. "I didn't think you would," she finally whispered. "I didn't think I'd need to," he replied, tipping his hat. "Looks like you figured it out all on your own." For a moment, they just stood there in silence, two people changed by a single act of kindness months ago. The town around them carried on, people talking, doors closing, life moving as usual. But for them, time felt still again, just like that first day. He looked at her, pride softening his voice. "You see now, don't you? What I saw back then." Clara smiled, her eyes glistening. "Maybe I do," she said quietly. And for the first time, the silence between them wasn't awkward or uncertain. It was full, alive, with everything they didn't need to say out loud. The evening air felt heavier that day, as if the whole town could sense something different lingering in the wind. Clara stood outside the general store after closing, her hands resting on the wooden railing, watching the sky burn orange before fading into purple. The cowboy hadn't said much when he came back, but he didn't have to. His presence spoke more than any words could. People had seen him ride in at dawn. By noon, the stories had already spread again. Asterisk, he came back for her. For Clara, hearing that didn't feel like a rumor anymore. It felt like a truth she could finally hold. She wasn't nervous this time. She wasn't hiding. The girl who once walked with her head down now met every glance head-on, not with pride but with calm certainty. When he appeared again by the well that evening, leaning on the same post as before, she didn't hesitate to walk toward him. He smiled when she approached. "You look different," he said. "Maybe I just stopped apologizing for who I am," she answered. He nodded, like that was exactly what he'd hoped to hear. They stood there quietly, watching the townsfolk move about, pretending not to stare. For once, Clara didn't care. The whispers didn't matter. She had spent too many years shrinking to fit into their narrow version of beauty. Now she understood that her worth wasn't theirs to decide. After a while, he spoke again. "They don't laugh anymore," he said softly. She glanced at him. "No, I think they're just learning what silence feels like when they've run out of cruel things to say." He chuckled under his breath. "Maybe. Or maybe they finally started seeing what I saw that day." Clara smiled faintly. "And what exactly did you see?" He turned to look at her, his voice steady and low. "Someone real, someone strong. Someone who never needed anyone's approval to be enough." His words sank deep, the kind of truth that echoed long after it was spoken. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The silence between them was full of meaning, full of everything that had changed since the day he first pointed at her in front of the crowd. The street lamps flickered on one by one as the sun disappeared completely. People walked past, some nodding politely, others pretending not to notice the two of them standing together again. The town had changed, even if it wouldn't admit it. Clara had changed more than anyone could have imagined. After a few minutes he said, "I've been in a lot of towns, seen a lot of faces, but there's something about this place now, it feels lighter somehow." She glanced around. Maybe because people finally stopped using laughter to hide their fear. He tilted his head. "Fear. Of being different," she said quietly. "Of being judged. They made me their joke because it was easier than facing their own insecurities." The cowboy nodded slowly. "You're not wrong. Most folks fear what they don't understand. But every now and then, someone like you comes along and reminds them there's another way to be." Clara smiled, though her chest ached a little. "You make it sound like I changed the world." He looked at her and said, "Maybe just this one." The sound of crickets filled the air as they stood there in the soft glow of lantern light. The quiet wasn't awkward, it was peaceful. The kind of peace that comes when two people don't need to prove anything anymore. As the night deepened, the cowboy leaned back against the well and said, "You know, when I left, I wondered if I'd done the right thing. Part of me thought maybe I should have stayed. But then I heard how you were standing tall, how the whispers didn't touch you anymore. That's when I knew I didn't need to come back to fix anything. You'd already done that yourself." Clara looked down for a moment, trying to hide the way her eyes softened. "You did more than you think," she said. "You gave me a reason to see myself differently." He shook his head gently. "No, ma'am. You just needed someone to remind you what you already knew deep down." They talked for a while longer, about the road, the places he'd been, the storms he'd ridden through, the people he'd met. His stories weren't grand or dramatic. They were simple, honest, like the man himself. Clara listened, feeling the rhythm of his words wrap around her like a calm wind. When he finally paused, she said, "Do you ever get tired of moving from place to place?" He smiled a little. "Sometimes. But I've learned something out there. Some people are meant to wander until they find a reason to stay." Her heart skipped. She looked at him, trying to read the meaning behind his words, but his eyes were steady, unreadable like always. "And have you found yours?" she asked. He took a slow breath, then looked out toward the horizon. "Maybe I just did." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath again, the same way it did that first day when everything changed. The night air was cool, the moonlight soft on their faces. Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years, ease. Not the nervous excitement of being chosen, but the steady comfort of being seen. She didn't know what would happen next, whether he would stay or ride off again, but for the first time the uncertainty didn't scare her. When he finally turned to her, his voice was quiet but sure. "You know, the day I pointed at you, I wasn't trying to make a statement. I just saw someone standing there with fire in her eyes and pain she didn't deserve. I figured if I didn't say something, no one ever would." Clara's throat tightened. "And now," he smiled, "now I don't need to say anything. The whole town can see it." They stood there a while longer, the stars above them endless and bright. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and laughter drifted faintly from the saloon. Life carried on, but between them time felt still again, calm, warm, and unbreakable. He tipped his hat one last time, eyes soft. "Don't let anyone tell you who you are again," he said. "I won't," she replied, her voice steady, her heart full. The cowboy looked at her for a moment longer, then smiled, the kind of smile that says everything without needing words, the kind that stays with you long after the person is gone. And as the wind brushed through the quiet streets, carrying dust and memory together, Clara stood tall under the moonlight, the same girl they once mocked, now the woman they could never overlook again.